If you break your arm, the X-ray shows that terrifying jagged line, and you go to the hospital, you get a cast, you go through weeks of physical therapy, and eventually, well, the bone knits back together.
And it heals.
Exactly. It might leave a faint scar on the X-ray, or I don't know, maybe it aches a little bit when the temperature drops. But you don't spend the rest of your life introducing yourself to dinner parties as a person with a broken arm. You just move on.
Yeah, the injury is treated as a past event. It informs your medical history, sure, but it doesn't dictate your present identity. I mean, human beings naturally expect a narrative arc with a clear beginning, middle, and a definitive end when it comes to illness or injury.
But then you look at how we as a society approach the concept of addiction. And that expectation of a definitive end just kind of vanishes. We're told it's a permanent state of being.
Which is exactly what we're looking at today.
Right. Today, we are exploring a set of source materials that fundamentally challenge that exact premise. Our deep dive is centered on a text called Life After Addiction. And, just to set the stage, this is a highly controversial, intensely personal critique of the most famous treatment model in the world, the 12-step program.
Yeah, and we've got the author's manifesto, case studies, field notes.
Yep. And our mission today is to impartially examine the mechanics of these really bold claims. To be clear, we aren't taking sides here, but we want to break down what the text is actually arguing because it's fascinating.
It really is. The claims in this text are, well, they're profound and totally unapologetic. And for context, this isn't some academic looking through a glass window.
Right, they were actually in it.
Exactly. The author spent years deeply embedded in various 12-step groups across multiple countries. They worked the steps, navigated multiple sponsors, so this critique is built from thousands of hours inside the rooms.
The core thesis here is right in the title, honestly. There is life after addiction. And importantly, it isn't found in a state of perpetual recovery.
Right. But to grasp this alternative framework, we need to start with the foundational philosophy the author is trying to dismantle. They refer to it as 12-step fatalism.
Yeah, so 12-step fatalism is basically the author's distillation of the mantra, once an addict, always an addict. The text argues this is far more than just a cautionary proverb.
It's more of a rule to them.
Exactly. It functions as this restrictive philosophy that forces individuals to anchor their entire self-concept to their past mistakes. I mean, the author points to a very common phrase used in these rooms, the idea that even when you are completely sober, your addiction is out in the parking lot doing push-ups.
Oh, wow. That imagery is incredibly vivid.
Yeah.
It implies that your illness has its own, malicious agency just waiting for a moment of weakness.
That's exactly why the author views it as terrifying. If you genuinely believe your disease is constantly growing stronger, completely independent of the healthy choices you make every single day, you are trapped in a state of perpetual hypervigilance.
Which sounds exhausting, completely. The text argues this creates a psychological self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're told repeatedly that an overwhelming catastrophic relapse is always hovering just outside the door, the sheer anxiety of that expectation eventually breaks you down.
So the anxiety causes the very relapse you were trying to avoid.
Precisely.
It brings to mind that physical injury analogy we opened with. The text actually uses a similar medical comparison.
Oh, the gangrene one.
Yeah. The author points out that if you cut your hand, it eventually heals into a scar. It doesn't stay in a chronic gangrenous state forever, requiring endless preemptive amputation. So the question posed to the reader is, why do we treat behavioral coping mechanisms like permanent gangrene?
Which is a heavy question. And we see that fatalism physically manifests in the ritual of counting clean time. Conventionally, standing up in front of a room to celebrate 30 days or 1 year or a decade of sobriety, that's framed as a monumental victory.
Yeah, usually.
But the text argues the exact opposite.
I found this part of the source material genuinely surprising, honestly, because hitting a milestone is universally understood as a reward system. So how does receiving a chip for a year of sobriety backfire?
Well, the argument centers on the psychological weight of the streak. The author contends that meticulously counting clean time constantly tethers the individual's mind to their last binge.
Because you're literally counting the days since it happened.
Right. But more critically, it builds this immense, sometimes crushing pressure. If you believe your addiction has been doing push-ups for 10 solid years, a relapse at year 10 isn't just a slip. It feels like an insurmountable death sentence.
Oh, I see.
Yet the text claims this pressure to maintain a high clean time count becomes so overwhelming that it paradoxically entices people with lower clean time to deliberately relapse early.
It's almost like a pressure release valve. They sabotage themselves early because the idea of carrying a 10-year perfect streak feels entirely too heavy.
Precisely. The fear of a catastrophic fall from a massive height makes jumping from the first step seem appealing. The very mechanism designed to track progress becomes a ticking time bomb of anxiety.
Yeah. So, if that fatalism is the psychological foundation, the physical structure built on top of it, like the meetings themselves, must reflect that same anxiety. The author doesn't hold back when describing the dynamic of a group sitting in a circle to recover.
No, they don't. The author characterizes these meetings as a gathering of unhealed people.
Right.
To illustrate the danger, the text uses a very stark biological metaphor. Imagine placing a group of people infected with a contagious airborne virus into a small, unventilated room.
Okay.
The illness doesn't dissipate because they're together. The viral load in the room simply multiplies. Gathering individuals who are actively defining themselves by their mental pathology to share their trauma uninterrupted is, according to the author, sharing the pathology itself.
But wait, I'm struggling with that viral metaphor a bit. Isn't the whole point of community support to find people who understand exactly what you're going through? I mean, when someone feels entirely alone, how does shared empathy suddenly become a contagion?
That's a fair point, but the text draws a sharp line between temporary shared empathy and a permanent identity of sickness. Empathy is vital in an acute crisis. But the author targets the famous program saying, the therapeutic value of one addict helping another is without parallel.
Okay, so they disagree with that.
Yes, the text bluntly asks the reader to apply logic to that statement. If you were suffering from a severe physical illness, would you seek out another deeply sick person to cure you, or would you seek a healthy doctor? The author acknowledges that the feeling of powerlessness and addiction is very real, but argues that this specific indefinite community structure fosters codependency rather than actual healing. They actually compare it to the song Hotel California.
You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave.
Exactly. The system is designed so you can check in, but you can never truly check out.
Because the moment you declare yourself fully healed, you no longer belong in the room. Your membership relies on your sickness.
Right. And that dynamic leads to what the author sees as a dangerous subversion of fundamental virtues. In these rooms, traits like honesty and willingness are held up as the highest ideals.
Sure.
But the author claims that practicing honesty in this environment is akin to confessing your secrets to a host of thieves.
Meaning the vulnerability is weaponized.
Yes. The text argues that the rooms are filled with individuals who are deeply invested in the cultic message of fatalism. When vulnerable people confess their deepest shames, those confessions are often cataloged.
To be used against them later.
Basically, if that person later decides to leave the program or questions the methodology, those past mistakes are brought up as proof that their disease is talking, coercing them to stay. Furthermore, the virtue of willingness is critiqued even more harshly. The author views willingness in this context as a demand to surrender your personal autonomy to a sponsor's power trip.
You are effectively outsourcing your logic and decision making to someone who, by the program's own strict definition, is also permanently sick. The text implies that this conditional recovery system threatens people with a life of shame if they leave, basically convincing them that stepping outside the room means immediate relapse and death.
Which creates a terrifying paralysis.
Right. So if we strip away this traditional model, if addiction isn't an incurable progressive disease that requires indefinite meetings and the outsourcing of your autonomy, we have to look at how the author redefines the problem. Like, if they are misdiagnosing the disease, what is the actual root of the sickness?
Well, the text redefines addiction entirely. It posits that addiction is not a chronic illness, nor is it a moral failing. It is a maladaptive coping mechanism.
Okay, so it's a symptom.
Exactly. It is a desperate strategy deployed by the brain to bypass overwhelming pain. Simply put, it is driven by trauma.
An avoidance strategy to survive tragedy. There is a specific case study in the source notes that illustrates this shift perfectly. It's about a man the author met in a rehabilitation center who had lost his young son.
Yeah, the details of that story really highlight the failure of the disease model.
Right. So the man became addicted to drugs shortly after his child died. The counselors applied the standard template. They looked for his character defects, blamed his combative attitude, and relentlessly pushed him to admit he was powerless over the disease of addiction.
But they hit a brick wall.
Totally. But later, during a different phase of treatment, the group participated in a bereavement ceremony. They were given balloons to release into the sky to symbolize saying goodbye to lost loved ones. As the man let go of his balloon, he broke down and said, "I never got the chance to say goodbye to my boy."
It's heartbreaking. And the author notes that from the moment he released that balloon and processed that specific grief, the cravings vanished.
Just like that.
Yeah. Because his addiction was not a mysterious creeping disease doing push-ups in the parking lot. It was the unbearable, suffocating inability to cope with the sudden loss of his child. The substance was merely the medication for that profound pain.
So once the underlying trauma was acknowledged and released, the need for the medication disappeared entirely.
Precisely. You don't treat the smoke, you put out the fire.
That makes a lot of sense.
The author actually explains the mechanics of this trauma through a concept they call the divided self.
Right, I remember this.
Yeah. So when a severe tragedy or ongoing trauma occurs, the text argues that the psyche splits into two distinct entities. You have the traumatized inner child, who remains frozen in the terror of the event, constantly fearing its recurrence.
And the adult.
And then you have the addicted adult, who steps forward to aggressively medicate and numb that child's pain at all costs. Through this lens, healing has absolutely nothing to do with sitting in a church basement calling yourself an addict.
Right, it's an internal process.
Exactly. Healing requires the adult self to reclaim its power, turn inward, and actively reparent and soothe that terrified inner child.
You know, the author's own background provides a fascinating, deeply personal context for this, because the author navigates the world as an individual with high-functioning autism.
Which completely colors their experience.
Exactly. Their core trauma wasn't necessarily a single explosive event. It was the chronic daily trauma of trying to survive in a neurotypical world, constantly masking their autistic traits just to avoid standing out.
And masking takes an immense psychological toll.
It's like wearing a lead suit every single day and pretending it feels light. Eventually, you have to use substances just to endure the sheer physical and mental exhaustion of holding the disguise in place.
Yeah, and recognizing trauma and a lack of autonomy as the true root causes demands a completely different approach to healing. If the problem is a traumatized child and outsourced logic, the solution must be to aggressively rebuild the individual's autonomy.
Which brings us to the author's alternative framework, the Solutions for Addiction, or the SFA.
Right. And the very first shift in the SFA framework is abandoning the concept of a higher power.
Which is a massive departure.
It's huge. The traditional 12 steps rely heavily on surrendering your will to a higher power. However, the author points out a structural flaw. You're asked to do this immediately after step 1, which requires you to admit total powerlessness and dwell on the utter catastrophe of your past behavior.
So you're at your absolute lowest point.
Exactly. Because of this sequence, the concept of a higher power becomes inextricably tangled with your shame and past pain. The SFA discards this entirely. Instead of searching for an external higher power to save you, the focus shifts to unearthing and reclaiming your personal power.
The SFA isn't presented as a fragile staircase where one misstep sends you tumbling to the bottom. It's a collection of 12 distinct solutions aimed at completely destroying dependency. Dependency on substances, on toxic behaviors, and critically, on institutions of recovery.
It's about self-reliance.
Yeah, and the fifth solution in this framework handles character defects in a way that feels like emotional judo.
That's a great way to put it. It's a remarkable psychological pivot.
How so?
Well, the traditional model asks you to list every character defect, confess them, apologize for them, and pray for them to be magically removed. The author argues this mechanism only serves to keep your brain focused on negativity, reinforcing an identity built on shame.
Right.
But the SFA's fifth solution states, accept that it's okay to be you by seeing each defective character as a gem of personality.
That's so interesting. Using the momentum of your supposedly worst traits to flip the outcome in your favor. The text provides incredibly practical examples of this too. If society or a sponsor labels you as manipulative, the SFA framework asks you to recognize that the underlying trait is that you are highly smart and strategic.
Yes, or if you are labeled dishonest, the gem underneath is that you are wise to the ways of the world. If you are risk-taking, the gem is that you are inherently entrepreneurial.
Wow.
The most personal example from the author concerns the label compulsive. Compulsivity is traditionally viewed as the primary engine of addiction.
But the author reframes compulsive into being fiercely driven or committed. They took that intense, obsessive drive that was previously destroying their health and redirected it entirely to build a successful creative writing business.
Talk about a pivot.
Yeah, they weaponized their own pathology for a productive purpose, taking the exact same energy output, but just changing the target.
And that transformation Taking absolute responsibility for your innate traits and finding a way to make them benefit society is what ultimately silences the cravings. You are no longer treading water, trying not to drown in your defects. You are using them to swim toward a specific destination.
That's very empowering.
It really is. And this pragmatic reframing ties perfectly into how the author's autism fundamentally clashed with the traditional 12-step design.
Oh, yeah. The author describes their time in the rooms as a joyride in hell, which makes complete sense when you consider how an autistic brain processes information.
It does. Individuals with high-functioning autism often process the world as concrete, literal thinkers. The 12-step model is a labyrinth of neurotypical abstractions.
So it's like speaking a different language.
Pretty much. You are asked to turn your will over to a vague, undefined power. You're expected to interpret metaphorical parables, and you have to navigate the complex, unspoken social hierarchies of group meetings.
Just sitting in a circle, exhausted, trying to perform the correct neurotypical social cues. If you hear turn your will over and take it literally, you might just freeze, waiting for a divine intervention that never arrives. The terror of literal thinking in a room governed by subtext must be paralyzing.
It was paralyzing. But that same literal cognitive style is exactly what allowed the author to spot a massive linguistic flaw at the heart of the recovery industry. The author zeroes in on the stark difference between the words recovering and recovered.
The grammar lesson that completely redefines the end goal.
Exactly. In the English language, the word recovered is in the perfect tense. The entire purpose of the perfect tense is to indicate that an action has been completely fulfilled, that it's finished.
Okay, yeah.
So when an individual stands up at a meeting week after week, year after year, and introduces themselves as recovering, they are stating literally that they remain unhealed. And if you are perpetually unhealed, going to a meeting simply means surrounding yourself with other unhealed people.
You're passing the metaphorical virus back and forth forever. But if you claim the word recovered, you are stating that the addiction is no longer a relevant driving factor in your daily existence.
Yes. And the author provides a really grounded analogy here. Consider a professional football player who severely sprains his thigh muscle. He goes to the clinic, he undergoes rigorous rehabilitation, and he takes it seriously.
Right.
But when the muscle is fully healed, he walks back out onto the field and plays the game as if the injury never happened.
He doesn't spend the rest of his athletic career running at half speed, constantly talking to the other players about his thigh muscle. He just returns to the game.
Exactly. And the ultimate thesis of the text is exactly that. Recovery is not life. Life is the expansive time you return to after the period of rehabilitation is complete.
That distinction is so critical.
The author observed that for thousands of people, the machinery of recovery had devoured their entire existence. They isolated themselves from the broader world, socialized exclusively with other former addicts, and devoted their entire bandwidth to the cause of addiction management.
So they lost their compass for normal, vibrant living.
Exactly.
That really asks us to deeply consider our own mechanisms for coping. Are we, or the people we care about, spending so much time meticulously managing the symptoms of our past trauma that we've forgotten how to actually exist in the present?
It is a profound call to self-sovereignty. The author's framework insists that you must paint a new life that is actually worthy of you, a life compelling enough to get out of bed for.
Yeah.
It starts with abstinence to clear the smoke, yes, but then you must identify and soothe the traumatized inner child, and finally direct all of your personal power toward doing something you genuinely love.
Well, we've covered some incredibly provocative ground today. We explored the deep psychological toll of 12-step fatalism, the paralyzing belief that the addiction is always doing push-ups outside.
This haunting image.
It really is. We examined the structural critique of meetings as closed loops of codependency, and we looked at how misdiagnosing trauma as an incurable disease keeps people sick. From there, we dug into the deeply empowering framework of the solutions for addiction, learning how to take the heavy mask of our past and polish our character defects into brilliant gems of personality.
This material challenges almost every societal assumption we hold about the disease model of addiction.
Without a doubt.
And it leaves us with one final lingering question to consider. Returning to the image of the broken arm that eventually heals into a faint scar. What if the ultimate cure for our deepest, darkest struggles isn't learning how to meticulously manage that scar forever?
What if it's something entirely different?
Exactly. What if the true cure is building a purpose so vibrant and a daily life so deeply absorbing that the scar simply becomes utterly irrelevant to who we are today?